Hello, everybody. My name is Elle, and thank you so much for tuning into my podcast called A Quiet Voice, where I talk about the thoughts and opinions that went through my mind as an introverted Gen Z. Today, on this episode, I decided to sort of follow the trend based on all of the videos that I've been seeing on YouTube, of which people have been commenting on the new Netflix series called The Winx Saga, which is supposed to be based upon the Winx Club cartoon, which was popular. It seems like everybody has something to say about this series, and admittedly, I did click on it immediately when I first saw it drop on Netflix. So, if you could just get a warm drink, find a comfortable place to sit, and relax as I take you into another trip into my mind. Okay, so we will be talking about the Winx Saga, of which Netflix dropped back in January. And this show seems to have garnered a whole lot of attention from fans of the original cartoon series and comics, and then also people like me who were not really fans during childhood but saw all of the buzz around the show and decided to take a look for it themselves. As I just mentioned, I just wanted to reiterate that I was not a major fan of the original cartoon production. The cartoon does appear to be vaguely familiar, so I'm sure that I caught the occasional episode when I was a child, but not enough for me to have a vivid memory of the fine details of the show. Okay, so now that that's been addressed, I'd just like to start with my first initial thoughts about the series. When looking at the trailer that Netflix released, I was quite interested. Though I didn't remember the original cartoon series well, I saw that it was about fairies, and generally that is enough for me to click on. I've always been interested in the sort of elemental magic, so I thought I'll just take a look and we'll see what this show has to offer. At this point, it had become quite clear to me that just because Netflix produced it doesn't mean that it's going to be terrible. But it also doesn't mean that they have an excellent track record, so it was about a 50-50 shot whether or not this would be a good series. From the little information I remembered about the original saga, and after watching Netflix's rendition of the show, I determined that it's probably not fair for Netflix to flat out take the Winx name and put it onto their production, because it seems like basically the only thing they took from the original show were the names of the main characters and the elemental magic theme that seems to have carried over. The show probably would have gotten less backlash if they had instead called it something else, or just said it was inspired by the Winx Club, instead of taking the full name and calling it the Winx Saga. Perhaps it would have made some sort of better spin-off alternative world of the Winx Club, and then it would have been hated much less. Or at least criticized less, since it wasn't trying to be the original Winx Club or trying to make money off of the fans of the original Winx Club. There are plenty of points at which people have already addressed the shortcomings of the show. One of the most popular criticisms seems to be the fashion choices of the main characters. Personally, the fashion wasn't something that I really took interest in until after watching the entire series and then watching the commentary of other YouTubers of it. Looking back, I can see, yeah, it probably is a problem, and realizing that it's true that the characters, although they're supposed to be of college age, they were dressing more like somebody into their 30s. All of the characters' clothing is not eye-catching, and I'm sure plenty of people like me who weren't aware that much of the original saga completely disregarded the fashion choices altogether, because nothing really stands out And the fact that Bloom does seem to wear a lot of red because we all need to be reminded that C is a fire fairy. Just in case he goes without actually setting something aflame for too long, we could always just look at C, what colors he's wearing, and then we would be reminded that yes, C is a fire fairy. What stuck me out more as being odd is the fact there seems to be very little teaching going on at this school. I would have thought that a school that is focused on teaching the students magic and how to control their powers, with a separate division of which teaches the specialists how to perfect their fighting styles, would have taken more time to actually teach the students rather than simply criticizing them or just disregarding the whole purpose of school altogether. Because what other explanation could there be with the fact that Aisha came to the school with great control of her water magic, and then somehow by the end of the season, she seems to have lost all control except for the last episode. She began the series being the person that reined in Bloom's out-of-control fire magic, which she somehow magically gained control of very suddenly, and then her magic seems to just be going awry, and that was never addressed. There was one scene into the series of which they were in class, but very little instruction was going on, and I would have thought that they would have separated the kids at least, based upon their kind of magic. Because how can one fairy teach a class about control that would be applicable to all kinds of magic? I fail to see how that would make any sense. Then we go back to the actual character selection. Tons of people have something to say based upon the original comics about who these characters should have been portrayed by. It's well known that Musa was originally supposed to be of Asian descent, and that was removed from the show. Or the fact that there was a Hispanic character as well, which was supposed to be Flora, but she was instead replaced by Tara, who was supposed to be her cousin, of which was told to the audience in an offhanded comment, just so that we wouldn't be able to criticize that choice and not having her be portrayed by somebody of actual Latin descent, because it's not her, it's her cousin, who is not here by some mysterious reason, even though her friends from the show are there. I found it to be an odd choice to replace the Hispanic character with instead a character who was plus-sized, which they had mentioned was also part of the effort to make the cast more diverse. But I failed to see what's the point of having a diverse cast and having a plus-sized character if you're still going to fall into the same tropes of which follows every other plus-size character of the similar genre. Tara could have been a good opportunity to have at least a confident character who was confident in her body and her own abilities, but that seems to be instead to trade it out with a character who was so self-conscious about her body that she needed to retreat into the dorm's bath as she was going to change. And then she stopped changing when Aisha came into the washroom and changed herself. She had so little confidence into her body that dictates where she will and will not change into her own dorm room, while all of the other girls don't think twice about it. Her size is the major source of her bullying, not to mention the fact that she has such an open personality and she is a people pleaser, and then everybody else just casts her aside. Yes, she does end up gaining some more confidence later throughout the show, but that seems to be more based upon her confidence in her Earth abilities rather than her actually gaining confidence in who she is and what her body looks like, which is not as satisfying because her magical ability was always there. As she had been around the school and trained by her father early on, her powers were always that strong and they didn't get stronger. But it just seems to be since she demonstrated her abilities to the other people in the school and to her bullies, that somehow just gave her the confidence to stand up to them. It didn't address the initial reason for her bullying or her being self-conscious. It's possible that she wouldn't have been bullied if she wasn't so self-conscious about her self-image in the beginning. So even though they did bring in a plus-size character, and they started her off as being one that lacked self-confidence, when they made her more confident, it wasn't even to address the issue which made her self-conscious in the first place, which I failed to see what was the point of that. And then there was the whole issue with the burned ones. Because in every supernatural show or movie, there needs to be some dark element of which puts the lives of the main characters in jeopardy. What I don't understand is, how is it that these burned ones have existed for so long and they were such a vital threat in the last generation, that they still know to this point in the next generation so little about them? You would think if they were such a great threat that they would have been studied, but it seems like the only thing that they know about them is the fact that they're difficult to kill, and the fact that if they were to scratch you, then you would die a slow, painful, agonizing death unless that burned one which scratched you is able to be killed before you die. You would think that they would have more information about how they became the burned ones, and how is it that they multiply. They found out that they actually have not been extinct over all these years, but they never address where have they been and why are they just showing up now. We find out that they are attracted to the academy because of Bloom, but that still doesn't answer the question of what is their purpose. Why do they exist? And it doesn't seem like anybody has even thought this through, which seems odd because the headmistress, not to mention Tara's father, seemed to be the type that focused more on thinking and analyzing the situation, and yet this doesn't seem to get addressed by anyone. If something is such a large threat to your kind, wouldn't you think that would get a whole lot of research? And it's true that initially, when they found out the burned ones were back, yes, the headmistress decided to capture that burned one rather than kill it immediately. They spent so much time trying to focus on whether or not there would be more, that they didn't take the opportunity to find out more about it, actually study its biology and find out information about how they're able to survive the beating that it takes. Why is it that a regular fairy isn't able to take down a burned one? Why does it have to be of somebody with incredible strength? They don't go into this sort of in-depth to find out the reason why, and nobody seems to question it. And then there's the whole issue about the secrecy. Half of this season didn't have to happen if there weren't such large secrets being kept from the main character. And Bloom, knowing basically nothing about the fairy realm, it's just taking whatever information people tell her and taking it as gospel. In her position, it seems like if anybody tells her anything, then it must be true, because people would be incapable of lying, and if it was something negative, they would just not tell her. She takes what Beatrice tells her as face value, as it must be true since she's being so forthcoming and the only person that is being forthcoming with information to her. And then she takes whatever the headmistress tells her as being true until it gets proven otherwise. A lot of this could have been avoided if she had just been honest with Bloom from the first day that she appeared at the academy. She decided to make up a whole story saying that she is from some long dormant fairy line, which, okay, I can see a reason for doing that, while she was still into the human realm. But once she actually did make it to the academy, I think that was the time to tell her the truth, since it would have been harder for her to leave until she has heard the full story and was away from her human parent. That would have been the time to tell her that she was actually a changeling, and that she was left into the human world for reasons of which, granted, she didn't know at the time. But if she was being honest from the start, then Bloom would have had a place to start looking, and she would have been more forthcoming with the information she obtained from others if she was granted the honesty from the beginning, from the staff of the school. And what is the reason why changelings are being thought of as being evil and dangerous? when there hasn't been a changeling other than her in the recent history. And at that point, everybody has already been acquainted with Bloom to discover that she is not an evil or a dangerous person. Yet, when the news comes out saying that she is a changeling, everybody turns to her as if she's some sort of monster, even though there's no actions which back this. If Bloom had been granted with honesty from when she first started to attend the academy, she would have been able to grasp her powers at a faster rate, which would have been explainable, because it would have made sense instead of her having her notebook saying that emotions equal power, that she would have been able to get a better grasp of her magic because it would have been able to be justified by her learning about herself and understanding who she is. As that's quite typical that the mental block that would have been into her mind, preventing her from using her magic, well, in the beginning could have been explained by her being able to understand who she is and understand where magic really comes from. Knowing your history can do a world of good in your performance and again make you more self-assured in who you are and being able to center yourself. But she has nothing to go on with because nobody is talking to her. And all she has is a little book of phrases of which make no sense because magic is not something that can be broken down into a simple equation. She wouldn't have had to rely on Stella in order to be able to produce her flame at will. And Stella is not the person who should be giving any sort of advice considering what her mother did to her. She was taught to use negative energy and emotions and to use anger in order to fuel her magic. Why she would think that is a good idea unless she wanted to also sabotage Bloom, it wouldn't make any sense otherwise. Her magic is still at a point of being so weak that she is glad when she's able to divide light and make it into a rainbow. Which, yes, her mother would be upset because a rainbow is not something of which magic user of her age or status should be happy to just be able to produce. But at the same time, if the mother had let her magic evolve naturally from when she was younger, then she would be far ahead of that. All this secrecy has created a lack of trust into the school, among the students, among the staffs, among the government, with the Queen. And I think it's incredibly odd how not a single adult here seems to know what was happening within the school. How is it that a spy is able to infiltrate the headmistress' office and become her right-handed person, and she's not able to realize it? How is it that Beatrix comes into the school just as easily and is able to make headway mingling among the student body because nobody thinks there's anything suspicious with her behavior? How is it that even when that assistant ends up dead, that the adults are so clueless that they don't even think about Beatrix even though she flat out introduced herself to them? It seems like everybody in that school has no idea what's happening, and perhaps only the Queen has the full picture of what is happening. If people allowed for the flow of information to happen throughout the school, then pretty safe to say that Rosalind would not have been released, because Bloom would have known better. And the girls in the dorm would not have given Bloom back that charm, because they would have known better about the consequences of her actually releasing Rosalind. And somehow Aisha just manages to fold over even though she knows that this is not going to end well. All of that could have been avoided. If Bloom had even known about the school grounds, he would have known at least not to take Rosalind to the center, the school's power, so that she can drain it and break the barriers. How is it that she's been at the school for any sort of amount of time and still not realized the importance of the barriers and how they even function? Considering that that's the thing that keeps all of the student body safe, you would think they would educate everybody about how it works and what to do if they were to ever fail and why. How is it that even when Mistress Farah realizes that Rosalind has been released, she goes and searches the school grounds, goes to the stone courtyard, takes one glance, and then determines that she's not there? even though she's the only person there who knows how cunning Rosalind is, and the danger that she poses. She doesn't spare it any more than 2 seconds before she declares it to be vacant. And then lastly, there is the anticlimactic ending. You know, all of those shows of which the main characters are up against some great evil which was unstoppable before, but suddenly at the very end they manage to gain the power to take down the evil seemingly without even breaking a sweat. It is at that time of which Bloom realizes she has ancient fairy magic, and she is able to take down all of these burnt ones. It only takes one blast of energy for her to be able to incapacitate them, and she gains that energy by going through a transformation sequence, which was the only point throughout this series of which I was reminded that this was actually based off of a cartoon. That transformation sequence is the only time of which we are greeted by wings, and she was actually able to fly for a minute. And then the water disappears, which was surrounding her as a fire unleashed, and then suddenly dissipates when her feet hit the ground again. And she blasts each of these burned ones with one hit of energy, and they all fall to the ground dead. And then everybody else is just sort of standing there into the background. And it's so odd that when it's all over, Headmistress Dowling has to comment about how is it that she spends one evening, just a few hours, with Rosalind, and then she unlocks this ancient fairy magic. Awfully convenient, without any explanation or any true mentoring. That was seemingly all that she needed to unlock this magic. And although that is predictable, the main character is supposed to have this great amount of power, and of course she would have to save the day. But it just seems incredibly odd that the build-up towards this great battle lasted all of 2 minutes, and the only person who had to fight was Bloom, thus making what was the point of her friends then. Ayuso was creating that ring of water magic around her just in case to contain the fire, but that dissipates as soon as she's back on the ground after her wings materialize. And then it's just nothing. The camera's not focused on them, but if it were to be turned on them, they would simply just be standing there just watching her. And that seems to defeat the purpose of the show, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember what the original cartoon was like, but I'm pretty sure they all worked as a team in order to be successful and powerful. But now it seems to be they're all just standing behind Bloom, just watching her turn into whatever she's supposed to be with this next upcoming season. And then when it's all over, we find out that Sky's father was actually alive the entire time, and he was the father figure in Beatrix's life. We're then left with the question as, what were they doing all these years? Was the whole point of Sky's father being kept secret was to wait until Rosalind was then free, and then the Queen would just reveal the fact that he's alive. And all of this is possible because for some reason Headmistress Dowling thought it would be safe to turn her back on Rosalind after she just threatened her. Because that would make so much sense. You're the person who knows more about how dangerous Rosalind can be, but you decide to get up and walk away from her, as if you did not already know that she was a serial murderer. You know that she knowingly let you all commit mass murder, but you think it's a good idea to turn your back on her after she told you that you're going to be going away for a while and she's going to take your job. It was not at all surprising when Rosalind killed her. What was surprising is that it took all of 2 seconds for her to lift her up into the air and to snap her neck. And then it was just sad to watch her body just be put into the earth and then covered with flowers, thus stating that they will never actually reveal how she died, or even the fact that she did die, unless it gets mysteriously uncovered by Bloom into the next season. It will not be explained, or at least known to the majority of the student body, what happened to Headmistress Dowling. These are just some of the things that kept me wondering with the production of the show. All these unanswered questions, which I'm sure some of it was on purpose, because they wanted to have a season 2. and it already appears clear that they're going to get the rest since it did top the Netflix ratings both in the US and Canada. Even when people do not like a show or movie, it doesn't mean that we won't watch it, just so that we know what we're going to be criticizing the production for in great detail. As I said, I never really watched the show, at least not enough to remember it. Perhaps I'll go back to watch the original cartoons later on, but it seems like the whole purpose of the original show was to show how important friendship was and what can be accomplished when they work as a team, but the Netflix adaptation seems to be more of the Bloom show, and about what she can do with her ancient fairy magic and what bad things happen when she goes off and does things without having the full explanation of what the consequences will be, or without knowing what happened to her parents, which I'm sure they're going to go into in season 2. But it seems to be this was a whole 6 episodes of her just stumbling her way through the other world, trying to figure out who's lying to her, who's telling the truth, and who is just going to talk to her and tell her anything. There was no true character development into this series, of which Bloom is still pretty much clueless and not knowing what she doesn't know. Aisha went from being outspoken and sure of herself and her magic to being confused about her magic and less sure of who she is as a person, since her character seems to deflate with each episode. Tara she went from being self-conscious about her body and too shy to use her magic to being confident in her magic and just not addressing what issues she had with her body. I think Stella probably grew the most out of any character, as she went from being ambiguously cruel to being cruel, but at least now we understand why, because her mother was terrible. But she does want to have friends now, since they all know the reason why she's terrible. And then we have characters like Sky, which I'm wondering how they're going to make this into an actual romance, because they made the whole scene into the first episode of which they were attracted to each other from the start, but there's been actually no relationship building, and at the moment he's just a guy who was raised by his combat instructor with blonde hair and is tall, and so that makes him desirable. Despite how many faults the show has, I know that I'll probably watch season 2, and I'll complain about that as well. And I hope you guys stick around to hear that. This seems like a good place to end this episode, and I thank you all for listening to me rant and criticize a show that was based upon another show which I don't recall watching. Thank you so much for tuning into Acquired Voice, and until next time.